I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado, and with me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
Boss.
Hey.
We are joined by the great Katie Whitlock today.
Hooray.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about a topic that I've wanted to talk about for years. We're going to be talking about generations, as the song goes. We're going to be talking about my generation. To set us up, Enneagram is a set of glasses. It affects how you see the world. It affects the values you hold and what you want. It seems to me that we could talk about generations in exactly the same way. And because the three of us represent three different generations, X, Millennials, and Z, I thought this would be a fantastic place to go for us as we kind of start out the fall. So you guys ready to get into this?
Ready.
Love it. I'm in.
In order to talk about your generation, it seems to me there are movies, there are songs, there's books, there's cultural markers that characterize your generation most. Katie, when you think about Gen Z and the movie that best characterizes your generation, what comes to mind?
So one caveat, I was born in 98, so I'm right on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. So if some of my answers seem millennial coded, I apologize. But I have two nominations. The first one is Shrek, which came out in 2001. So Gen Z kids were either babies or not born yet, but I think the cultural effect of that movie was very much like young Gen Z childhood. And it also has just been memeified to death since then.
What's the big thing about Shrek that hit your heart?
So I was looking up, when you asked me this question, what's the movie that represents your generation? The book was easy for me. The song was sort of easy. And the movie was I don't know, because you know what my real answer to this is I don't think Gen Z watches movies the same way.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
So my real answer is it's like HBO Max is what or it's Hulu or it's the fact that movies aren't the same anymore. So my second answer was going to be any of Christopher Nolan's later stuff, not when he was first doing stuff in late 90s, 2000s, and that was only because also I read online someone was he's one of the few directors that still makes really good movies, right? Because people don't make good movies anymore. So those were my two nominations. My real answer is I don't think it's the same,
Is there a show then? Bringing up
SpongeBob is my first answer. I'm thinking Nickelodeon stuff, and also Discovery Channel or something, or Cartoon Network was a big one when I was a kid. I know that's also a little bit of late millennial, but there were for sure a lot of cartoons I watched as a kid. But when you talk about things that unite a generation, because my generation is so on the internet, uniting an entire generation is much, much harder than it used to be, I think. So
yeah, it's going to be a theme for us as we're talking through.
Yeah.
Especially Z.
Yeah.
TJ.
Just film. I actually had two entries for films. The first one is Garden State.
Yes.
I've never heard of that movie before.
Mean Girl. Oh my. A piece of my heart just died. Oh, that hurt so
Millennial
bad.
love story with Natalie Portman and the
Zach
nurse
Braff.
guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And the second one.
It is, the second one is Mean Girls. I feel like they're both, they represent the kind of commercial success that millennials were privy to, as well as the sort of they came out of nowhere independence. like Mean Girls was one of the things that helped get Tina Fey's name into everyone's minds, even though she was on SNL and everything.
Yeah.
Like Mean Girls was one of the things that helped everyone figure out who Tina Fey was. So
can I ask you a question? So the whole genre of movie that's like The Hangover, Step Brothers, Superbad, that kind of thing, would you label that as millennial? Because I was gonna say that sort of thing.
Anchorman was close to, like, was within the realm of considering the movies, but I feel like they hit a certain level of comedy, but I don't know that they necessarily get like the people who didn't watch those kinds of movies.
Yeah, didn't watch them. But
didn't care about
are you
them.
saying they are millennial movies versus Gen Z movies?
I would guess they were, made by Gen Z, but
That's what it is. You have a
Gen X,
Right.
You have a Gen X creator like Tina Fey creating Mean Girls, but it speaks to that generation. That ends up being my answer as well. Like the common answer for me in terms of like Gen X movie is going to be Star Wars, but the right answer is The Breakfast Club. And both those movies are made by non-Xers.
Yeah.
But they so informed the self-understanding and self-actualization of my generation growing up that they just color how we see things. So I'm going to save songs and books for our next episodes because we might overwhelm
fair.
unless you really want to say it. Because
I have some good stuff to talk about, but that
we will
could be a
talk
whole
about it for
podcast,
30 minutes. So.
teaser, just creating space for us.
I have like a slew of jokes that I just have to put in a drawer now. Come on, man.
Well, to get into generations, we're going to be looking at Gene Twinge's book, Generations, the real difference between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silent, and what they mean for America's future. This book is fantastic. It's mostly a sociological study of what really characterized the generations in terms of what makes them different from those that preceded them and those that came after them, and just highlighting the differences. Again, it's going to just bring out some color here of why the generations see things differently. One of the things about boomers, aside from the fact that they're just this huge group, like just population wise, they just dominate American politics because there's so many of them and we're a democracy. But Twinge writes that one day in the early 1990s, the media woke up and realized something. Young people weren't boomers anymore. Just like its name, a letter used as a placeholder for an unknown variable, Gen X, came in. It's slippery, hard to define. And she spends a bunch of time just saying, at this, boomers were just the kids of Greatest Generation, Silent Generation, and nobody knew who we were. And that's why we're a variable, And so to set this up, I want to give her setup for this generation, which has a lot of highlights there, just worth kind of naming. This is Gen X is the generation born 1965 to 1979. She notes that everyone born in the year 1979 and before was an adult on September 11th in America. And that characterizes a way of seeing us. Gen X is the last analog generation. That is, we know about cassettes, VHS,
rotary phones,
physical media.
Yeah.
Every generation prior to Gen X had a draft for the war, but we did not. And there is a bipolarness to my generation, that we're characterized by pessimism and wearing black, but we're also the multi-colored 1980s material girl, self-confident selves. And Gen X is in my view, the primary thing is that Gen X always believed we were 30. When we were 12 years old, we were 30. And I'm 49 and I'm still 30. And I just have never not been 30 in my head. Any thoughts on that setup? Things that you see of this generation?
Millennials are perpetually 17. So they're like, it is really funny that the sort of the forgotten generation.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so many of these conversations about generations, and I love that she mentioned the CBS News thing where it like listed all of the generations and some numbers and facts, and it just completely skipped Gen X.
Yeah.
And there is like there's so much about what I think defines this generation that sort of overlaps and interacts with itself.
Let me spell out what you meant there real quick. There's like an image that came up that said like essentially which generation doesn't get enough attention? Boomers, millennial, or Gen Z? It's that kind of joke.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. Except it was a real thing that really happened.
Right.
And this is how Gen Xers feel about themselves a lot of times. I feel like there's sort of a larger narrative that we can point at that says that this is a whole generation that sort of got skipped over because they were expected to take care of themselves. And I like that a lot of this data sort of informs the behind the scenes parts of that narrative.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I was just struck by, I've heard all these things before, right? Like, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about the latchkey kid stereotype and all these things, and like being the first children of divorce and all of this stuff. But I had forgotten that it was a whole separate generation from either boomers or millennials. Like there was a whole other thing in the middle that were actually the people to do this. I guess when it just got talked about in popular culture, my brain just decided that that was either a boomer thing or a millennial thing and just completely forgot that there was a whole other thing in the middle. So it was interesting to read through this chapter and realize that there's a whole bunch of people born between 65 and 79, including my parents, by the way. But
that's a good way to put this, that we are such a transitional generation, especially from the analog to the digital. A couple of the people, and you'll hear these as the creators, that Twinge writes out a whole list of, these are the people who were born during this time, but people like Dave Chappelle, Jordan Peele, Kevin Smith, Kurt Cobain as artists are going to characterize a lot of movement in terms of film values in the arts. But specifically, she spends a ton of time just saying all of the second generation tech giants, with the exception of Zuckerberg, are born Gen X.
Yeah, the internet is built by Gen X.
Dell, Musk, Page. We don't have a lot of political power, as it were. Our power resides almost exclusively in the fact that we built the internet. And there's that side of things, but I suppose it's the case. The second generation of females in politics is also really big here. Kamala Harris is 1 year prior, but Coney Barrett, Stacey Abrams, Gretchen Whitmer, Melania Trump, these are all women in the public eye with powerful positions. And then for a long time, it was believed that Gen X just wasn't going to have a president. But recently that may have shifted, because Newsom's X, DeSantis is X, Warnock is X, and
yeah, but none of those things guarantee we're going to have an X president.
No, but the voice of X is kind of coming in as people kind of get tired.
Yeah.
There are so many boomer. I mean, it's been since Clinton. All of our presidents have been baby boomer up till today, except for, of all things, Biden, who is the silent generation. We went backwards. Last image here is that a lot of the big voices in media, especially in politics, Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, Joe Rogan, these are all Gen X as well. We are forgotten, but there's a lot of the culture is shaped by the work, for good and bad, of this generation. So thoughts on the people?
Well, the fact that you're bringing up so much pop culture, like this is a common conversation for you and I, period. But part of that is because you are Gen X.
Yeah, that's true.
And that is the prevalence of a pop culture worldview comes from that generation. And Yeah, just all of these people, like the way that we all started to weave TV quotes into our ways of into our language. It's irresponsible to talk about generations without also acknowledging that things have sped up so much, and Gen X sort of buying into that pop culture is part of their identity, and that movement, that flow, that speeding up of everything has to do with their interaction with pop culture, and the way these people are seeing how the world works and seeing it reflected back to them is new according to the world. Like that, the way that Gen X has been able to communicate it changed things.
I also have something related and also unrelated and tangential. So I think one of the things I'm hearing in this is Gen X is the people who built the internet, the people who bought into pop culture. They were talking about either young people who, by the time Gen X was old enough to build the internet and start all these things, right? The young people were the millennials, and then all the old people were the boomers. And so it seems like Gen X has talked about the society that they have lived in, but they're talking about the two generations on either side of them. They're not often talking about themselves, or at least the things that they're talking about for themselves, like don't get popular. So one of the things I realized I struggled with before I read this book was like anything old is boomer. Like boomer doesn't just mean people born from 45 to 65. It's like anything old is just a baby boomer. Anything new is just millennials, even though now we're kind of reaching a point where new stuff actually might be Gen Z, right? Like Gen Z people are making new things. So it seems to be there's this generation in between that actually built, where we then go talk about millennial and baby boomers. But the people running those platforms are actually something in between, right? I don't know what my point is there, but
no, I think that's really valuable in terms of the perspective of Gen Z looking backwards, because like I don't make distinctions between boomers and silent generation.
Yeah.
I made greatest generation, but that's just because I knew people who went to World War II and they were close to me, and I heard their stories. But the shared culture that TJ was bringing up cannot be overemphasized in terms of something that we've lost. Like, and it got hinted at by Katie early on in terms of, look, we just don't do movies. Like shared culture not only is a big part of growing up Gen X, but it's like when I think of what characterized my generation most, it is the witty ability to talk about shared culture at the depthiest levels and to say, I've seen the things that everybody should have seen. Like, here's the pieces of art that should be part of shared culture, but you guys probably haven't gotten around to seeing or listening to.
Yeah.
So this is characterized by, like, if you ever see an interview with Quentin Tarantino, he's like the master of talking through all the movies and music and the rest.
Mm-hmm. But even that, I think there's a conversation to be had about like the movement from a more collectivistic mindset into a more individualistic mindset. The idea of shared culture for you represents everyone watched the same thing last night, and now we all talk about it around the water cooler, right? Mm-hmm. And then as the internet became a thing and YouTube was born and streaming and devices and all, like, technology bred individualistic tendencies. And so Katie and those younger than her, it's not that they don't have that shared culture. It's that the things that they're talking about are not whole TV shows. Mm-hmm. It's memes. Yeah. It's like it's tweets. It's smaller and much more quicker and much more sort of individualized. So the pockets are more substantial. Mm-hmm. Whereas, I mean, you have a group of people who actually watched Twin Peaks when it was on the air. There's like 45 of them, and that was it. But everyone else was talking about Seinfeld, right. You know? And now like there's whole pockets that are representative of these things, and you can so much more easily move in and out of those pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Last thoughts here, Kate?
No more.
To transition, this is a good place to transition in terms of y'all will know historically that in order to win a world war the way that it was won, American culture had to become almost singular and myopic, and we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. That is such a dominant way of being in the world for World War II generation. And we have a singular culture comes out of that time. And when thinking of the 1950s, oftentimes people will even refer to it in those sorts of ways. Mm-hmm. The 60s are so important because it's breaking up that singular culture and saying we need to consider the perspectives and value of different races of people, different genders, mostly those two. I mean, the sexual revolution, women's empowerment, and the civil rights movement end up showing America that there's more than just the one culture, and there are individual distinctions that matter. And I say this because individualism, we're going to see it running through all the generations to Gen Z, becomes more and more and more powerful, potent, and bigger. And it really matters when it comes to Enneagram. I don't know that Enneagram works or is like comes into prominence much earlier than the 70s or 80s for exactly this reason, because Enneagram is very subjective. It's very much about how I see the world and what my motive is and how it informs where I'm going. In Katie and I's discussions in our other feed, it's always shocking to me how much subjectivity is elevated in her language versus mine, because I see myself as actually being very informed on these fronts in terms of subjectivity, and yet I still have a lot of anchors in what I see as an objective way of coming to the world and experience. Mm-hmm. We've just moved into that space of individualism. So that's where I wanted to start. Certainly individualism is part of Boomer experience, but for Gen X, this would be the first of 5 themes I wanted to talk about with Gen X. Is the individualism becomes a big element of our culture. So I'm going to quote Twinge here. She says, Whitney Houston's song, The Greatest Love of All, which is about love of yourself, by the way, and Offspring's irreverent tune, Self-Esteem, capture the generational arc of self-focus in American culture, which is moving from silent to Boomer to Gen X. That's mostly due to growing individualism. If you're going to rely on yourself and your choices, you'd better like yourself. The Google Books database codifies the change. She says the use of terms such as self-esteem and self-focus skyrocket in American books between 1970 and 1995 when Gen Xers were growing up. And that strikes me as so important to note. So I brought up The Breakfast Club as being our movie. It's about all these individuals in high school who are all very, very different, but they're part of a collective. Mm-hmm. Like they form a club. Mm-hmm. But the individualism is what really is part of that. And I would want to say that there's so many parts of like other TV shows or books we could mention that have that theme, from Stephen King's It to a TV show like Saved by the Bell. It's the individual and the community. What do you all see there?
I want to bring up the responsive stance here. Jeff and I have been talking a lot about kind of what it means to be in the responsive stance. And we talk a lot about responsive stance numbers 1, 2, and 6 are really concerned with what they ought to do and what they should do, right? And the loyalty you feel to other people and to your culture and maybe to your generation, right? So I think responsive stance numbers, more than other numbers, although I do think all numbers do it, kind of absorb the values of their generation in a specific way because they are very concerned with what they ought to do. So Jeff, you're 1. when you look at yourself, do you think there's any part of your oneness and what you feel like people should do that is connected to like this individualism thing of your generation? Do you see any connection there or no? Like, do you think you internalized any of that because you're a Gen Xer?
I do. What's going to be interesting is, as you're bringing that up, is part of my generation is going to be anti-establishment
Right.
in its way of being in the
Right.
world. And so being part of the collective anti-establishment movement is a thing, you know? And so I'm sure it is the case that as, you know, as a Homo sapien in community, you know, human beings are wired for community and can't get away from it. And I think you're exactly right to say the way I would internalize it, given my type, is having a sense of the rules and how things function. And not all of the people in my generation are like this, but it's probably the case that a lot of the forebears, to float it back to you, is it not going to be the case that a lot of those who are making generational change probably aren't going to be responsive types, as it were? It's probably going to be more independent. We can do anything, move the ball forward in a new direction kind of folks.
Yeah, maybe. I would maybe paint that with a very broad brush, maybe, but yeah. You know, I mean, I'm sure, especially ones, like there have been a lot of ones who have done a lot of very, very good things, right, for the world.
Moving the ball forward.
Yeah.
Even thinking specifically about that idea of the anti-establishment part of Gen X, it's not anarchy. Like there certainly anarchy is present, but a lot of that tear down the establishment stuff is a reaction to watching their parents grow up saying damn the man and then become the man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's part of the tearing down of the establishment is that the establishment is the recognition that the establishment is broken. And there's a reforming that needs to happen from that tearing down.
Yeah. And I think, speaking of, I'm just thinking of one specifically, just because Jeff is a one. Like, shoot, I had a thought. Like a one in the silent generation, or maybe even like early boomers, when they are part of that collective society, a one I feel like would internalize a lot of that. We owe things to each other. It is right to, you know, have your victory garden or work for your neighbors or do all these things, right? A Gen X one might look a little bit not like like when people think of ones, I think they think of this stereotype of like judge or lawyer, like they just follow the rules all the time. And that's really not correct. Like a one raised in a society where the rules are that you break the rules is going to look very different, right?
Yeah.
The right thing to do is to not always follow the rules. That's going to be a very different person.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, Jeff, like as you kind of make a mental note of like all the oneness that like runs through you and all the things that you believe, right? Is there any inkling of that? Like it's good to break the rules when the rules aren't just, or it's, you know, it is your duty to go against the establishment if the establishment's not right. Like, do you carry that with you? Do you think?
I everything you're saying, I think is spot on. Is absolutely spot on. That ones may really divide hard between I'm standing up for the rules that are in place, they are good and create a good society, versus the one who looks at the rules that are presently in place and says we need to burn all of this down. It's and we need to rebuild in a significant way. And so, and I think you're exactly right. It's saying you're part of a culture that elevates anti-establishment kind of feelings at time, and so my oneness might get captured in that and express itself, which is exactly what I wanted to well done, by the way. That's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see how does Enneagram and generation come together, and that would be an example.
Maybe individualism was like a weird time to bring that up, but I was just thinking about how like people who are not necessary, as I'm saying this, maybe I don't agree with it, but people who are not necessarily hardwired for individualism which in my mind are responsive numbers, how do they react when you are born into an individualistic generation, right? What does that look like? So I was just wondering, like, what kind of things you think people of your generation in the responsive stance like would have internalized, right? About what we owe each other when we are living in a generation that doesn't very much think like that anymore.
Right. I see it in my approach, especially to present issues in a country like ours. Most of my solutions are very communal in nature, whereas I feel like a lot of other Gen X, and we'll get here, the cynicism moves them towards, I need to just look out for myself and I'm going to vote that way. And whereas most of the solutions that come to my mind end up having to do with dialogue, seeing past differences, coming to answers where everybody's voice is at the table and we move forward together. That's very much how I come to the world.
Yeah. I get to say something against what I just said. I do think it's important to note the author of this book, I think her definition of individualism isn't necessarily I only care about myself. It's that each individual has something to say, I guess, is more what she's talking about. I don't remember exactly how she said it. Whereas the collective thing of like the war was that doesn't matter, right? There is like this collective, we are all one. So I think what you're saying is still individualistic, right? It's just that we all have a voice and we all should come together and have our own each individual voices, right? So
no, exactly right. Did you have a thought?
Well, I wanted to say more about Dr. Twenge's perspective on individualistic versus a collectivistic sort of mindset, and the I love that she says over and over again, these things are not inherently good or bad. There's good on both sides, which is, an Enneagram principle. There's a high side and a low side to individualism. There's a high side and a low side to collectivism. And like thinking about Gen X growing up in an environment where they're being pushed into some amount of self-focus, not necessarily like narcissism, but like taking care of themselves. Like there's we'll talk more about like the latchkey, the divorce, like the ways that Gen X sort of had to raise themselves a little bit, and that movement into that caring about the self has some good things, it has some bad things, and that
as we'll talk about in a minute, if it's the case that a huge part of the the characteristics of society for Gen X growing up is the latchkey phenomenon and divorce, there's a large portion of our culture that was forced to raise themselves. And that is our story.
Yeah.
And it's a unique story. It's a story that neither generation before or after experienced in the same kind of ways, because it was kind of a dip if you look at the numbers. And so what does that then say for those of us who had that experience?
And it's really easy to point to that if you were raised in an environment where like the whole nation came together and did all the things to win the big war. Like that's a big deal. And then you watch these youths who only care about their flannels and their ripped jeans and their like that. It's really easy to point to the bad things of the other side. And to consider individualistic mindset as a negative way to be in the world is categorically false. It is a way to be in the world. There are good things and there are bad things about it.
She makes a point like the civil rights movement would not have happened without a shift towards individualism, right? Because it is the belief that every individual voice should have a platform, right? Yeah. The LGBTQ movement would not have happened without a movement towards individualism. So it is certainly necessary for all the things that have happened in our history so far, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to see as we go down towards Millennials, Z. We're going to notice how much more the individual comes out. And unity and diversity is a theme that transcends Western culture. Like it's the dominant theme in in Western philosophy is unity and diversity, and how do you understand them in conversation with one another. One of the quotes, and I'll end this section here, but one of her quotes was contrasting boomers with Gen X, and she says, boomers took the unlikely step of exploring the individual self in groups. Seminars, war protests, music festivals, they declared themselves unique individuals while gathering in a crowd. Self-focus was a journey boomers took together. But for Gen X, individualism wasn't a journey. They were born at that destination, and they didn't need a map because the culture of their self was their hometown. And that comes out in the latchkey kid, the divorce, and some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about in terms of the values here. But that struck me as pointed, even when choosing to declare oneself an individual, it's done very communally prior to Gen X.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to see much more of that later on, the individualism that comes out of millennials and Gen Z. So,
yeah.
Well, speaking of latchkey kids, were you a latchkey kid, TJ?
Heck yes, I was.
Heck yes.
Yeah, but that wasn't a thing that by my time, we didn't really refer to ourselves that way anymore.
I grew up in downtown Denver. I remember as a 5th grader taking my 4-year-old brother to elementary school across a set of streets, one of which is the busiest in Denver. Denver, by the way, has 1 million people, and taking him to preschool.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that today, like a parent having that. But my mom left at 6 a.m. I'm taking off at 7:30, and that was our rhythm. That's just how it was done.
Yep.
I'm used to being in drive line for an hour waiting to pick up my kids, as it were, and that's just not the phenomenon. So, but latchkey kid is the idea that some of us in Gen X had a string with a key around our neck because we locked the door when we left for school and came home to an empty house. So, thoughts on this?
Can I ask a question? So you said, oh, I can't imagine that now, right? What's the difference because you're fine, like you're here, right?
This is true.
You're not fine. You're here.
I have to go through therapy still,
right.
but I'm rolling.
So what's the difference in like, oh, I can't imagine doing that now, but you survived. So why wouldn't you do it now?
It's almost entirely cultural. It's also the case that I don't think that I say it feels like our city isn't built for that. Like the elementary school that my kids go to is over 5 miles away. So like actually getting there might be tricky for them as elementary schoolers, but maybe back in the day, that's how it would have been. It's just the case that culturally, parents collectively in my town, we all drive our kids to school, and that is assumed by the school. Like there's no crosswalks anywhere.
Really?
Like with people holding signs that say stop and watching elementary schoolers go across. I see that nowhere in my town. That may be unique to our city, but that would have been part of my growing up experience is, they were assuming that kids were walking to school in the morning from all over.
Because your parents were
I can't
at work.
remember anyone drive. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We were either taking a bus or we were walking to school.
Yeah. There's also a significant cultural shift around the perception of safety.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. The parents don't let their kids be alone anymore, and you can tell this by the amount of news stories of someone who got that someone called the cops because kids were at a playground by themselves. Like this is a thing that happens in our culture, and 20 years ago that was just Tuesday.
Yeah.
Did
people talk about kids getting like kidnapped when you were young, Jeff?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah.
But then people just still did it?
It's like
I mean, I guess they didn't have a choice.
Apparently, like violent crime and kidnappings I'm sure were a little higher, and she goes into that a little bit statistically. I think it was just part of one of those conversations in the water, though, more than an actual reality. Like, you are much more likely to get kidnapped statistically by a family member or a close friend than you are by like Ed off the street.
But man, there's a
7-year-old.
lot of talk about not talking to strangers, right?
Yeah, it was everywhere.
Well, that's because I'm asking because I feel like the narrative I grew up with was, you know, kids used to be out all the time because people just didn't worry about it. Like, it just wasn't part of the social culture. But you're saying, I mean, people did talk about it and then also just still sent their kids out. So
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
like,
And it was
that's
more one of those
interesting to me.
it was like it was the media trying to terrify parents, you know. It's like, don't you realize your kids are out there and they might get grabbed?
Yeah.
Do you know where your kids are?
Right, exactly.
So they're gonna tune in. You know, it's that early fear. But yeah, there was a quote in the book of something to the extent of, today you see adults Googling best parenting strategies for your growing miracle. And our parents were like, you can play with a knife in your room, just don't smoke weed in the kitchen.
Right.
That actually, that's spot on, like, in terms of the zeitgeist.
We should bring
of the
that back a
time.
little bit.
Well, but it's also a cultural thing that, like, as a parent now, like my 5-year-old, I walked to elementary school by myself. I walked to middle school by myself, but I would be shunned as a parent if I sent my 5, 6, 7-year-old to school from 2 blocks away by herself.
Really?
Right? And she's literally 2 blocks away.
Is that you can
And
tell
if
I
I
don't have kids
told
yet.
people that I was doing that, they'd be like, whoa, that's so unsafe. And it's just a cultural understanding that changed.
I can feel the baby boomer in me rising up. Ah, come on. They're fine.
Yeah. She's fine.
Well, hopefully there is a swinging back.
Yeah.
I mean, another Gen X movie that should be mentioned is itself like a critique. So much of later, 90s pop culture is critiquing the individualism that's coming out, and it's in Fight Club. Like the line of "You're a precious little snowflake" comes out of Fight Club, and the condescension of those who are too subjective, are too much about their own emotions and feelings and the rest. So another quote from the book in terms of the cultural moment was that Gen X see themselves as tough in contrast to millennials and Gen Z, and this is obviously broad brush, who are insufficiently awed by their toughness, by Gen X's toughness. They didn't boast about it as children. They don't value it inordinately as adults. In a brilliant move of jujitsu, many Gen Z and millennials have figured out how to use their thin skin as their most powerful weapon. This is somebody talking about their particular hang up with younger generations, by the way. This person says, my particular brand of toughness, it turns out, no longer holds much currency. I spend much of my time trying to pinpoint the moment when people became so much crueler than they used to be and so much more fragile. That is how Gen X sees young folk in a nutshell. Is we were tough, our parents left us, we raised ourselves, and we went through all of the markers of growing into adulthood, and now it feels like the emotional life of many younger people are thrust forefront. And obviously you guys could probably name better than me how often that gets brought up as as an insult.
I also think it's interesting that person said people have simultaneously become crueler and more thin-skinned, right? Mm-hmm. I wonder if Gen X was like one of the last generations, just like you were the last generation before all this technology, all this social media, all this stuff. When you were 14, things were really hard, but they were 14 level of hard, right? Whereas now when you're 14, you can be dealing with people talking to you on the internet and they're like 27, just being like cruel. Or what really happens is that 14-year-olds learn how to talk like a 27-year-old, and then they're talking to other 14-year-olds in just horrible, mean ways that like you wouldn't have known to talk about if you did not have access to social media, right? So I wonder if like part of this tough skin people were able to get because you were dealing with very tough things, but they were like age appropriate tough things, maybe. I don't want to like make it sound like it wasn't hard. I'm just wondering about that. You know what I mean? Because I have heard from other sources that kids are meaner. Like teachers who have been teachers for a long time will tell you kids are meaner these days than they ever have been before. So I don't know. That's my thought.
I think it's a stellar point. I think that the internet ends up opening vastly more gateways to an individual when they're very, very young of like broken humanity, you know?
And you're 14, so you don't know how mean it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 But I also think like one of the things that Twenge brings up is that Gen X sort of had a shorter childhood but a longer adolescence. And so like they grew up into that 14-year-old space a lot sooner, but they stayed in it for a lot longer. And like I wouldn't necessarily say they were the last to, oh my gosh, what did you say?
I said they were the last to, things were hard, but they were like age appropriate hard.
Right.
And that's not true. I don't know.
I think they're like in that transition. Like they're the last ones to experience age appropriate toughness, but they're also the first ones to start experiencing the kind of emotional turmoil while still being underdeveloped.
Yeah, true.
One thing that Gen X, she points out that I would imagine it's the case. Cigarettes, alcohol, and sex were things that Gen X experienced much earlier, both than boomers and then millennials. It's like the physicality of their experiences hit earlier on those fronts.
Well, it's like you said, Jeff. I mean, you use the number 30, but it's sort of the same thing. You're like, I've been 30 since I was 12, and then I stayed 30. Like, it's kind of the same idea, right? Like, you grew up very fast, and then you stayed that number, even when you did actually grow past it. So, unprompted, you kind of brought that idea up.
That's exactly right. I suppose thirdly on my list is that we're the children of divorce. I read this book 2 years ago and just loved the hell out of it. The primary quote that hit me so hard, I remember where I was when it came out I was listening to the audio version, is this. She says, if Boomer's defining moment was the JFK assassination, for Gen Xers, there's only one question. And I was like, I wonder what this question's going to be. And the question is, when did your parents get divorced? I heard throughout my childhood about where my parents were when Kennedy was shot and just how important that was. And I remember listening to this and saying, yeah, what is, like, it was almost like there was a break in time where I was like, I don't know what the event is for my generation. What is the event? I can name it for Gen Z. It's COVID.
Oh, I was like, what?
Yeah. And I can name it for millennials.
We have two.
Yeah.
I think.
It's going to be September 11th and
Columbine.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And here's the thing. I lived in Littleton, Colorado when Columbine happened, and it still isn't the defining moment for me. But when did your parents get divorced is the transformative spot. And that's not for, like, obviously what it affected. I think she said it was like a quarter or maybe a third of Gen Xers had divorced parents. So this absolutely isn't the case, like, across the board. But I just sent my youngest to college this week, and our home has been kind of fundamentally changed with their absence. And that has characterized how I've been thinking about divorce as I was prepping. The image of, like, suddenly a parent is leaving is really different, but especially if you experienced it like I did when I was 7, that is shaping of all values foundationally moving forward. So You guys got thoughts?
It's interesting. Even the defining moment itself for those two generations are collectivist versus individual. Like the assassination, that's the same thing. Everybody saw the same thing. It would have meant something different to you, but like my parents getting divorced versus your parents getting divorced, that's two different things. And my experience of my parents getting divorced versus your experience of your parents getting divorced, there's probably some things that are similar, but that's just another example of like we all have a voice and something different to say, and it's important, right? So even just the
Are your
event
parents
itself.
not together?
No, my parents are together. That was a general we and me.
You guys are both making two fantastic points that I hadn't thought about. That Kennedy's assassination is we're all experiencing the same trauma at the same moment together. There is a fundamentally different type of trauma taking place in a divorce that's very individualized.
Right.
Like nobody else can see that your house is breaking up. I remember going to my second grade class and telling my teacher, this is what's taking place. I'm the only one in that classroom who is feeling the way that I feel that morning.
Yeah.
Very vivid memory of that. But secondly, the marriage by its nature is a collective. Marriage by its nature is like the idea of blood, or this is our family. The divorce in some ways is a movement into becoming an individual.
Yeah.
And that also is taking place. And so the individual is leaving the house. It's also the case that in my situation, because so much isolation was thrust into my world when my parents got split up, because my mom was working 2 jobs at that point in time in order to make all the things work. Because now you have to afford 2 houses. You think affording 1 house is a problem today, and so the collective that I was part of, the family, and was there, and then you're thrust into more of an individual experience of your self in terms of how that happened. Anyway, all fantastic points.
I also want to bring up, like, within the latchkey thing, one of the things that we didn't really talk about that much is TV. Like we just have not talked about that much about TV, and you see, if you trace the history of television, like you see boomer families, people growing up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, like early 60s, watching TV as a family experience. It's a collectivistic experience. And then as you get older, as technology moves, watching TV becomes less and less collectivistic and more individualized, to the point now where you can literally all be in the same room watching something totally different and never speak to each other, right? And there's so latchkey kids, it's not just that they weren't home with their parent. It's also that, like, I came home after school and just watched TV, right? Like there's the influence of TV is also part of this, and we can see that weaving in and out of like divorce didn't just build this individualism. It also, like, I watched a lot more TV than some of my peers because my mom was at work.
And also she has this point of like what was on TV. Like that was part of why, Gen X kids grew up a little early, is because like, well, there's adult shows on TV and there's not much else. So I guess I'll watch an adult show when I'm 10 and at home by myself. You know what I mean? Like, I think she uses like Battle of the Network Stars or something as an example, but it's like, well, there's nothing else to watch. So this, I guess, is what we're doing, which would not, I don't think, be so much the case today. Right. But
I didn't watch it, but a lot of my friends would have watched like daytimey talk showy shows that were like Oprah was actually kind of above board, but there were a lot of shows that were showing very dysfunctional people being interviewed, doing horrible things. Right. And that was part of the experience of how do adults behave? And so in a different kind of way to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the internet speaking to the 14-year-old from a 27-year-old position. There was a little bit of that on the TV front here.
That's true. I didn't think about that. I have an Enneagram question about this divorce stuff as a 1. And the answer to this, actually, I'm interested if the answer is just no. That can be your answer, right? So we're talking about Gen X being the first kids of divorce. so there must have been this big switch in that now divorce is at least talked about, if not like okay. Do you think as a little baby one, was there this big, did it feel like a big cultural shift in like the core values of what it meant to be a family? Like, do you remember much of that? Do you remember like the adults around you talking about that? Because it was the boomers getting divorced, right? Like the boomers were the ones getting divorced, and the boomers
Correct.
were the one that were raised, you don't get divorced, and then they got divorced. So I'd be interested to see what a boomer would have had to say. But you would have been a kid while all these adults were like struggling with this whole like, is this okay for me to do? Right? I don't know. Did adults talk about it around the kids, you know?
So this is an unfortunate backdoor way to answer the question. And listeners who actually listen to all of our stuff will know that sometimes my energy really gets up on divorce because I haven't had a chance to actually deal with this in my own mind and heart till recently. And so it's actually coming out in my vocabulary and some of the topics that we're bringing up. And it particularly came up when we talked about Robin Williams a couple weeks ago. But I remember here's a way of seeing my experience. In ninth grade, I had a terrible year. Ninth grade is at Littleton High School. It's a huge high school, and just got swallowed up. And I'm the youngest in my class. And so I would have been the youngest in the high school. Just felt super uncomfortable being raised by a single mom in Littleton. And I decided that summer that I was going to go live with my dad. I didn't think there was anything big about this at all, of just choosing to go switch homes. Like my dad lived in, 4 hours away in the mountains, and I wasn't feeling comfortable, so I was going to go live with him. It was absolutely a shattering moment for my mom. And I, like looking back now, of course that was a shattering moment for my mom. It never occurred to me because my home got broken up years ago, and so apparently this is quite flexible where you're living, where you're doing. I'm looking out for myself at some level.
And in part because your parents allowed you that choice.
Well, talk about that.
Because there's the movement into the more individualistic, like parents are giving the things that they missed out on, right? So as we've watched society progress, parents are much more about autonomy for children. Mm-hmm. In a way, like not necessarily autonomy, but like letting their kids be the ones who decide.
Yeah.
And I think like 100 years ago, there's no chance that the kid would decide which parent they want to live with. And now it's like it's court cases, right?
Right.
And
no, I mean, my will, I mean, and I could look back on this now, and this is actually, so much of my oneness comes out now. It doesn't come out in the moment. It comes out now with retrospect going, gosh, you guys made a bunch of really bad choices, didn't you? Right. Like that's where my oneness comes out. I'm hyper judgmental right now and I can't get out of it in terms of looking back on the choices that my parents made. What I actually was doing was walking into a buzzsaw of giving fuel to one side in their competition with the other. Mm-hmm. Jeff says he wants to do this. That's leverage.
Yeah.
Is what that is. And so there's a ton of things that now I'm dealing with, thinking through all of the things that happened as a young person, because I've gotten a chance to be a grown-ass man, to raise two kids, to see the dynamics of elementary school through high school as a parent, and then to introspectively say, this is what my mom was going through when I was 15, and this is the choices she made. And having that mindset has been really difficult for me. So my oneness comes out in that space. It didn't come out like Kurt Cobain's did, where I want to burn everything down. Right. You guys got divorced, and now I'm furious at the world. That wasn't my experience.
Do you think your kids think home is fluid, like you felt home is fluid?
Well, apparently not. My youngest is having a very difficult time acclimatizing this
That's
week.
what I'm wondering. Like, right? These new kids are going off to college, and they're actually having a really tough time. And I mean, part of that is good because we are not children of divorce anymore, at least certainly to the levels where it used to be, right? I don't want to be like, there's a silver lining to your parents divorcing. It taught you like being able to make a home where you are. Maybe that also felt weird to say, but
no, I think it is the case that maybe we can talk about this a little bit. Like, I do feel like I am wired to be an entrepreneur. Like, the sorts of things that I've started when I was in my 20s are strange. Like, I wrote 2 books. I started a church, essentially built a job for myself at a local university. And I had 2 kids before I was 30. I don't know how common that would be today, but my sense of self-individualism, what I could accomplish was pretty stinking high and severe. And this is just what you did. Yeah. You take out care of yourself and you exert your will in the world.
Yeah.
So there is a positive there for sure.
And you adapt to your surroundings. Like, you do what you need to do to get it taken care of.
Right.
I think Gen X is a pivot point for that idea as well. Like, there's whole generations of like even going farther back, like men joined the profession of their fathers and women became mothers. And like that was society for a few thousand years. And like, we saw advancements and change in technology. And then you have like greatest silent boomers. Like, there's a sense that like, you work hard, you get a good job, and you take care of your family. And then Gen X comes along and does not have those same kind of anchors about what their future needs to look like, but they still have to take care of themselves because they have been for their entire lives. So it's much easier to adapt to say, I'm going to write 2 books, I'm going to do this thing because I have to pay my bills, and these are the things I'm going to do to take care of that.
Yeah.
To build on that slightly, notice how this happens. Like, boomers were so numerous, they dominated the job market. I have so at my university, the philosophy department for the first time, they hired a new person, and I had worked there for 10 years. And 1, I couldn't apply for it because of my level of education. And 2, we had 200 applicants, all with PhDs, applying for one philosophy position because the age group that had been in our philosophy department, all boomers, just wasn't retiring. Right. And so what you see, I think, with our generation was we had to, in order to actually create a career, we had to create an entirely new sphere of jobs.
Yeah.
And that's why you see so much of the tech revolution in my generation. It's these people who wouldn't have had, options elsewhere. If they went into a field like mine, like, there just are no jobs for people my age in my field. And that's one of the reasons I didn't pursue a PhD. It's just there was no work to be done in my field. So, but the guys who are creating Google, creating YouTube and the rest, that's just like huge highway. Anyway.
I also heard when you were saying, when TJ was saying, and then, men did what their fathers did and women had babies. And then it was just, you just took care of your family. And then Gen X came along. And also probably, I imagine it felt like, well, take care of my family. What family, right? The family I was a part of blew up. Who's to say my family's not going to blow up? So there's also this, I think a whole lot of like found family media came out of Gen X. Like, once Gen X grew up and started making the cartoons, there was a lot of like found family, right? And what can you do with your friends and all these things. That was, I imagine that was also kind of a motivator for that as well. If family is not guaranteed, what else is there? So you do get the entrepreneurs who your whole 20s, you're just working so hard.
Exactly right. I think prior to my generation, there was a lot of apprenticeship as the rhythm of cultures going back through time. Not one person did I ever feel like drew me in as in that kind of way.
Yeah.
So
we're so far apart from that now that when you said apprenticeship, I was like, what are you going to join a guild? Like, what do you like you smelt some copper or whatever? Like, what the... So yes, I would say that we have gotten away from that.
I also think that, like, thinking about the Enneagram and the way you've made this point several times, but here's another opportunity to make it. Like, the Enneagram doesn't have space to exist before this mindset, because you have to figure out what you're capable of in order to make your own way, right? And there's a lot more opportunity, but also necessity to focus on what are your skills.
Yeah.
So we see the rise of a lot of these personality typing ideas. We see the popularity skyrocket of personality theory and typing mechanisms to figure out, like, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what things do we need to work on. Like, there's building of these characteristics throughout, like, boomers on, because generations had to do more work with themselves to figure out where they actually fit. Right. And part of that comes from this space of, like, the entrepreneurial nature of taking care of yourself, paying your bills when all of the jobs are filled.
Right.
I feel like that's a good place to end. I wanted to talk about materialism, but I think this is going to get into stuff that we're going to experience with you all. We are the analog generation. We like our physical things. I'm real curious how that moves, because the sorts of things that millennials and Gen Z invest in, I don't think part of it is there's not the option of buying the house for a lot of younger generations. And in part, that's not necessarily the marks of success and what is desired most by younger generations than mine. And so I'll save materialism for some other point in time. But last word on how all this relates to the Enneagram and where we're going.
I think it is. I think TJ had a good point. I kept wanting to talk about, like, Jeff's experience as a one and all this generation stuff. And I think the point that we should make about Gen X and the Enneagram is that Gen X was the first time when Enneagram could have been successful, right? That's the point, is that Gen X brought the changes that made Enneagram be able to take off. So more zoomed out. Thing.
That's a good place to land, because I brought up Breakfast Club before. It's like, in Breakfast Club, it's a movie about all these different individuals and how they see the world from different perspectives, but they're able to talk about how they see the world from different perspectives in a shared space. And in my experience, that's one of the real values of Enneagram. And you don't want to get too individualistic, and you don't want to get too collective. There's a beauty in finding, your perspective among shared family, and that Enneagram has.
We were talking about this with divorce, like finding shared experiences within individual experiences. So, like, yeah, my parents divorced at this time and in my life, and it was this specific experience that affected me this way. But also, I'm one of many people whose parents got divorced when they were children. We can all talk about similar things. Similarly, with the Enneagram, there's and you could see this in the Breakfast Club, like that individual experience doesn't disappear, but you learn how to understand other people's a little bit better, and you can talk about shared experiences in a new way, right? You learn how to understand other people's a little bit better.
She's Katie Whitlock. She's a treasure to us. He's TJ Wilson. What? You're officially awesome. You know that? I'm Jeff Cook.
Officially.
I'm Jeff Cook, who you aren't just isn't interesting.